On December 27, 1892, Livingstone and Biddle College, now known as Johnson C. Smith University, played in Salisbury, North Carolina, with Biddle winning 5-0. Over time, HBCU football has evolved. HBCU football's popularity continues to rise. Millions attend games each year and millions more watch on television. The HBCU bands provide some of the top entertainment in the country. Over that time, some of the best players to ever play in the National Football League played at HBCUs. Every Monday through Friday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, national radio and television host Donal Ware takes a look at what's happening in HBCU football and talks with coaches, players, administrators, and media about the season. Make sure you join the conversation on social media now. Here's your host, Donal Ware.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Tuesday, October 3rd. I'm Donal Ware. It is Takeaway Tuesday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. Let's do some house cleaning. If you don't know, the HBCU National Players of the Week 3, as a matter of fact, we'll begin with North Carolina Central quarterback Davius Richard, and what a game he had in the 49-48 victory by the Eagles over Campbell. 21 of 35 for 265 yards. He had a touchdown, no interceptions. He also rushed for 4 touchdowns in the ball game as the Eagles came back to defeat the Camels. One of our other HBCU National Players of the Week, North Carolina A&T linebacker B.J. Turner, had 19 tackles in the victory over Norfolk State. He had 2.5 tackles for loss and a crucial pass breakup as Norfolk State was driving down to try and tie the ball game with a 2-point conversion, and he knocked the ball down, and A&T was able to run out the clock and get the victory. The third and final HBCU National Player of the Week, Isaiah Freeman, the quarterback for Lincoln. He compiled 431 yards of total offense, including passing for 278 yards and 3 touchdowns, and rushing for well over 100 yards and a touchdown in Lincoln's come from behind victory, as a matter of fact, for the Lions. So the Lions, with Isaiah Freeman, and knew that if you looked at what he was able to do last year, he's a good quarterback, solid football player. And I think he's flourishing a little bit more, and that was a big victory by the Lions over Winston-Salem State. Let's take a look at the HBCU coaches and media polls, and North Carolina Central regains its top spot in both polls. So in other words, the previous couple of weeks, the Eagles were number 1 in the coaches poll. Florida A&M had been number 1 in the media poll. Let's kind of break it down. In the coaches poll, North Carolina Central receiving 18 of the 20 first place votes. So it goes NCCU, FAMU at number 2, who received the other 2 first place votes. Jackson State at number 3, Hampton at number 4, Grambling at number 5. 6 through 10 looks like this: Howard, Alabama A&M, Southern, Alcorn State, and Tennessee State. Now, turning over to the media poll, Florida A&M had 11 of the 22 first place votes, or 21 first place votes, while North Carolina Central had 9, but the Eagles outpointed Florida A&M by 2 points, and so thus received this week's number 1 team in the media poll. Benedict at number 3 received a first place vote, followed by Jackson State at number 4 and Virginia State at number 5. 6 through 10 looks like this: Hampton, Virginia Union, Grambling, Tuskegee, and Miles rounding out the top 10. So let's look at some of the takeaways from week 5 during the HBCU football season. And I'm going to start with this. Grambling looks like it's on a bit of a roll, and one of my other takeaways I'll talk about a little bit later on in the program, defeated Prairie View A&M 35-20 in that State Fair Classic. So in the last 3 games, quarterback Miles Crawley, 7 touchdowns to 0 interceptions. He's protecting the ball. That Grambling offense is really starting to come around to put up 35 points against a solid Prairie View A&M team is really doing something. And so we're seeing where Grambling is really starting to come around and starting to play well. And speaking of Grambling, Grambling is obviously a team that's really coming around. But if you look at that SWAC Western Division, Southern starting to kind of find its stride with its victory over Arkansas Pine Bluff, now 2-0 in the conference. Alcorn State with a nice victory, overtime victory over Prairie View A&M, is now 1-1 in the conference. And when it looked like Prairie View A&M is still right there with a 2-1 record in the conference. So remember last year, the SWAC's Western Division was decided on the last game of the season, and Southern came away victors and Western Division champions. So it looks like we're going to be down the road. I mean, listen, we're not even really halfway through the season, okay, and we already have sort of that battle. I think right now, certainly Texas Southern is on the outside looking in. And as well as Arkansas Pine Bluff. But when you're talking about Grambling, you're talking about Southern, and you're talking about Alcorn State, those are the teams that are going to decide the SWAC's Western Division. Another one of my takeaways is that you have a lot of the teams starting to dwindle now. The undefeated teams starting to dwindle. Tuskegee losing to Alabama A&M in big fashion, as a matter of fact, 58-3, now no longer amongst the unbeatens, as well as Allen. Allen dropped its football game this past Saturday as well, so it's no longer among the unbeaten. So with respect to the unbeatens, you have Benedict remaining, and you have Virginia State remaining as undefeated. Both are 5-0 on the season, and both have more of the challenging games still ahead. As a matter of fact, Benedict's got a matchup coming up with Fort Valley State. That should be an outstanding football game, a nationally televised game. So very much look at, and when I say nationally televised, I mean ESPN2 nationally televised. Virginia State still has some of its toughest games ahead of him in Northern Division play. Virginia Union, Bowie State still ahead for Virginia State. So the undefeated teams are starting to dwindle in HBCU football. Another one of my takeaways, North Carolina Central with that comeback victory over Campbell. Now, it looked bleak for North Carolina Central, especially when you look at Campbell. So Campbell's got a good football team, a really good quarterback, one of the more elite quarterbacks in FCS, of course. So does North Carolina Central, thus Davius Richard, the HBCU National Player of the Week. But to be able to come back against Campbell, and I think what's interesting is you talk about the matchup last year, and it was in Bowie's Creek, and where Campbell, the home of Campbell, Bowie's Creek is like it's maybe about 30 miles from Fayetteville, North Carolina. So to kind of give you perspective on where Bowie's Creek is, but it was all Camels last year. Well, even though the Eagles got down, that's a championship team. Remember, MEAC champs, HBCU national champs. It's a team that came back. The Eagles at this time last year sort of, and I'm not going to say trying to find their way, but they weren't the elite team that we know them to be now. It's an elite football team, number one, obviously, in both polls. I think you could see where the voters said, hey, that's a big win by North Carolina Central over Campbell. And this week, North Carolina Central ascends to the top. And Not only that, okay, you look at, because that's a MEAC win over a CAA opponent. But did you also know that the MEAC this year is 5-5 against CAA opponents? 5-5 against CAA opponents. Now, this past weekend, and I'm gonna tell you what's interesting, and even sort of as the play-by-play voice for North Carolina A&T football, like I realized the Aggies are in the CAA, obviously, but in this role of what we do with Box to Row, I had to go back and recount. Like I was looking at all the wins that the MEAC had, and I missed, North Carolina Central's victory over A&T, and then A&T's victory over Norfolk State. That counts, obviously as CAA wins. I mean, I guess in some respects, I'm still having to get acclimated to that as well. But you talk about the MEAC, and again, I laughed, quite frankly, at the suggestion that there was a demise of the MEAC going back a couple of years ago when Florida A&M, when Bethune-Cookman, when North Carolina A&T left, and there was only 6 football playing institutions. But again, you got to remember, okay, you don't qualify automatically for the FCS playoffs, but that doesn't matter because the MEAC forgoes the Fs and has since 2015 has foregone, if you will, the automatic berth to the FCS playoffs to in fact participate in the Celebration Bowl. And so six schools, 8 overall, doesn't really matter, but the football is still good. Again, 5-5 against the best. And you could say what you want, okay? The record is 5-5 against some of the best competition in FCS in terms of the CAA being considered the best, maybe the best conference in FCS. Another one of my takeaways, teams that kind of started out slow are starting to kind of come around. Quinn Gray is in his first season as the head football coach at Albany State. Guess what? Albany State started the season off 0-2, now 3-2 on the season, 3-0 in SIAC play. Langston started the season off 0-2, now 2-2 on the season. The aforementioned Grambling started the season out 0-2, now 3-2 on the season, 2-0 in conference play. Fort Valley State, first game of the season, a loss to Tuskegee. Now it's won 4 straight, including 4 conference games. And the defending CIAA champion Fayetteville State Broncos started the season out 0-2. Tough losses. I mean, you talk about a tough loss to Pembroke, okay, on a late field goal, and Fayetteville State is used to sort of these field goal games more recently. You go back to the CIAA championship game last year, beating Shawan, beat Virginia Union, going back to last week on that field goal with 6 seconds remaining to eke out that victory. So you're looking at Fayetteville State on a little bit of a roll. Still plenty of football left to be played by Fayetteville State. I mean, I like where Johnson C. Smith sits in that Southern Division right now. Johnson C. Smith's playing some good football as well right now, and receiving votes in the HBCU media poll. So those are some of my takeaways from week 5 of HBCU football. Let me know some of your takeaways. What did you think about week 5 in HBCU football? I thought we also had some great finishes. That's another takeaway. I mean, we had some close games, some great finishes, some game-winning field goals. I mean, again, not a field goal, but the win by the Eagles over Campbell was in overtime. You look at Prairie View A&M's or Alcorn State's victory over Prairie View and A&M. That was in overtime. So you had a lot of close games also in week 5 of HBCU football. But I want to know your thoughts on some of your takeaways from week 5 in HBCU football as we approach the midway point in the HBCU season. Tell a couple of friends about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can always watch on the Box to Row YouTube channel. As a matter of fact, let me plug for a moment the Box to Row YouTube channel, because not only is the HBCU Football Daily Podcast there, but you've got great content, great conversations with some of your favorite sports and entertainment celebrities. So again, that's on the Box to Row YouTube channel, and you can listen to the HBCU Football Daily Podcast on boxtorow.com as well as iHeartMedia.com. We transition to week 6 on tomorrow's edition of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, and we'll talk with you then.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can also listen to the podcast at boxtorow.com, iHeartMedia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to get your HBCU football fix on Box to Row with Donal Ware each weekend on the radio station near you, and on SiriusXM on HBCU, Channel 142, and on ESPNU Radio on SiriusXM, Channel 84. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Box to Row for the latest in HBCU football, and don't forget to tell a friend.